Well, hi, Todd. This is Tod Twist, and I'm delighted that you could be here just to chat a little bit about initial oblate formation. So, to start us, Todd, tell me, how long have you been an oblate?
Well, I made my final oblation in 2012. So now I'm a little over a decade, I suppose, or a dozen years. And since COVID time was in there, at least for me, that is a big interruption.
Mhm.
When I was going through oblate formation, Sister Catherine Nihat was the oblate director.
Nice.
And at that time, Sister Lucia was the prioress.
Okay. All right. Things change a lot in 12
Mhm.
years, don't they?
They do.
Oh, cool. Well, what led you to be connected with St. Paul's Monastery specifically?
Well, in some ways, it was serendipity. I was coming out of a grad school environment that was very uh, bookish, intensely academic. And so the way that things were being presented out of St. John's up in Collegeville, if I would have had a magical transporter machine like in science fiction shows, probably I would have tried to do things up there, but it's just a long way away.
Mhm.
And at that point, I was with my spouse here. I was being a stay-at-home dad, and it just wasn't going to happen that I went up to St. John's. And so we did have this Benedictine community here in the Twin Cities. And so I thought, well, this is a women's community. I mean, is that gonna, well, as it turns out, it did work out and it did work. And so, like I said, serendipity. It ended up being the community that I could get to, and I'm really grateful for that.
Yeah. Thanks, Todd. I think you bring out a really important point that we are in an area where we're surrounded by really wonderful Benedictine communities. But if you live in the Twin Cities and you're
Mhm.
time limited or space limited, I think this could be a great option for both men and women. So awesome. Well, tell us now a little bit about what drew you to study Benedictine spirituality and the rule of Benedict through initial oblate formation.
Well, and this is weird. As I was tracking it down, I guess I really was a grad student. I went through a history of books I read, right? I
Mhm.
happened upon a guy who had written this memoir uh, and he was centering on his experience with baseball, of all things. But he also was a spirituality author. And so from his memoir, I jumped over to one of the number of books that he's written about spirituality. And his name's Robert Benson. And he wrote about a book he called A Good Life. And it was a book about Benedictine spirituality. And so it's not a real thick book, but it ended up really piquing my curiosity. And at that point, I was still living in Madison, Wisconsin, but I knew that I was coming over here to the Twin Cities, and I had started looking for a place that I could maybe be an oblate. So I came into the metro area looking for a place that I could become an oblate. And I had a lot of illusions about what that would mean and what it would be like. But I, again, I came in interested for good or for ill. That's what was happening.
Mhm. Well, and that title or that topic of a good life, right? Hopefully that's what we are uncovering as oblates. Yeah, beautiful. So besides walking through formation in partnership with me with the initial oblate cohort, you also are a facilitator at one of our evenings, specifically the one on prayer. And so why do you think this topic is so important for our future oblates?
Well, thank you for asking. As I was putting together some thoughts yesterday evening, I was scribbly because it was late, and but what I was going to say for the last question flows into this answer. Back when I was a struggling grad student, the structure of the Benedictine pathway seemed really appealing. It
Mhm.
seemed thoughtful and wise.
Mhm.
And for some people, that would be absolutely enough to say thoughtful and wise. But for me, it was too much of what had already become a bad thing. I was such a head-centered person at that point in my life. I was so much in thinking through things that it was just killing me. And I was, to borrow a phrase from a friend, just torqued around the axle. I mean, just it's just in a permanent state of just uneasiness. And now, as I look back on how my perspective on Benedictine spirituality has changed, I would say that it's grounded and practical. And for some people, thoughtful and wise would maybe catch that, but for me, it needed to be some different words: grounded and practical. So as I've been changing as a person, as I came into an oblate, being an oblate, a very imperfect person, and on the road to becoming hopefully more at ease, more loving, more grounded and practical, I've had to focus on even a deeper core value than the ones we talk about in our formation session. If you look at the back of the Benedictine medal, it says pax, or peace. And so that focus on peace and practices of peacefulness and trying to be personally at peace as well as relationally with others at peace has had to become my sort of guiding star.
Yeah.
And so the session that I help lead deals with prayer and Lectio. And I come at those things from this standpoint of fostering peace. And so I tend to like to throw around labels. I'm a recovering teacher, but sometimes labels can help put handles on things. And so when I think about prayer, and this wasn't the segment I was leading, but I think about prayer as kind of an entry into a pattern. We have this daily pattern, or these patterns of interaction. And by that, we are present to and experience the presence of the divine, whether you talk about that as God, however, in order to get to the listening. So pattern, presence, and listening. But in Lectio, we kind of start off with present. You're looking to be present. You are seeing this scripture, this text, this situation, this picture, this moment in nature in terms of presence. And in there, you try to discern some sort of connection. And so you could call that pattern or connection or whatever. So you start with presence, pattern, in order to get to the listening. And so if those handles help, great. If they don't, you can just set those aside and say, oh, how nice is that? The reason why it matters is that we are just in a very intense time of unrest in our society. And I think just in our personal lives, we have quite a bit of dissension, whether it's disinformation or just literal noise. It's a noisy environment that we live in. And then also in our personal lives, even a person whose life is relatively simple has a lot to pay attention to. And it gets compounded if you've got your phone settings wrong, so it's always interrupted you, right? So, and so the reason why these practices of prayer and Lectio matter is that they help us get to a place of peace, or at least open that possibility. And so that pursuit of peacefulness, I try to change the words up a little bit. When I'm being a spiritual director, they always told us to be a peaceful presence. I flip it around and I say, be the presence of peace, not because it means something radically different, but it seems to hook in a little different to the listener. And so but finding different ways to put handles on what it means to be cultivating peace is the reason why these particular practices of Lectio and prayer are helpful. So thanks for asking.
Yeah, that's a beautiful answer. And I do think that the world needs more peace. And if we can be bringers of peace, practicers of peace, I think receivers of peace, that's a huge gift. So, Tod, anything else that you wanted to say about being an oblate?
Well, I think that we kind of bring ourselves and the implicit project that God is working out in our lives to being an oblate. For me, I've had to undergo kind of a big, I don't know if it's a restructuring as much as a allowing the priorities to be really reversed.
Mm,
I When I came into being an oblate, I was really focused on what I would call being a knowledge person. I wanted to be someone who had something to teach, having something to say.
mhm,
And obviously, I don't mind saying things, as my answers have demonstrated here. But if I had to look at what I do with trying to be a facilitator of initial formation with the Oblates or working with the Benedictine Center, I describe it now as facilitating practice. I facilitate practice rather than instruct or teach. And
mhm,
so, for those people who are interested in the oblate pathway, and they do bring capacities of knowledge and instruction, that's really cool.
mhm,
Um, it's not where God in my oblate journey has put me forward uh, to be that guy or that person. So
mhm,
my my encouragement would be to be receptive. Being an oblate might flow kind of along the same path as who you've been, and you might discover a very different leading. And really, any of that can be great. For me, it's been a good place to try and change, and it's, I mean, not so much to praise myself, but just to say, wow, this contemplative spirituality stuff works. It's pretty cool to have your spouse and your kids go, yeah, yeah, Papa, you're different than you were a few years ago. And that I'm shocked at how much that means to me. And I mean, that sense that people close to me are willing to say, yeah, you've changed is it's a huge deal. And I think my being an oblate has been a big part of that. So thanks.
Well, Todd, it's been a gift to be on this journey of transformation with you. And again, thanks for your time today.
Thank you.